Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here this morning. I'm so happy to see everybody rolling in. I am very excited about the conversation we're going to be having this morning. So I really want to thank you for your time. I know that we all have a lot going on, and you know, it's been a year and a half, right? And I think that this conversation is more important than ever. So I'm really grateful that you're here. I'm also really excited this day has arrived because we had intended to have this conversation in person a year ago in Corvallis. I'm really sad that it couldn't be in person because I really wanted to hang out for a while with Sarah and Desiree in particular, but all of you. But we didn't want to wait any longer to do this. So I'm glad we figured out how to do it online and that you were all willing to fight your Zoom fatigue and do it again this morning. We just didn't want to wait. For those of you not familiar with Oregon Heritage, we're part of Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, but we help support people and organizations do heritage work across the state. It includes the Oregon Heritage Commission and the State Historic Preservation Office and the Oregon Historic Cemeteries Program. We provide funding and technical assistance for all folks doing history, including documentation, designation, preservation, and sharing Oregon's historic resources. Resources like historic buildings, sites, archives and photo collections, oral histories, cultural practices, historic cemeteries, kind of all the things that could possibly be history. We also assist with designations like the National Register of Historic Places, the Oregon Heritage Traditions, and Oregon Heritage All-Star Communities. We provide ongoing networking and technical assistance through our partner programs, including the Oregon Main Street Network, Certified Local Government Program, and the Oregon Heritage Mentor Corps. We operate to achieve the goals of the Oregon Heritage Plan and the Oregon Historic Preservation Plan. These are statewide plans for all folks doing heritage work, kind of goals for heritage in the state. Two of the Oregon Heritage Plan goals are to include more voices in and create more access to Oregon's heritage and historic resources. And the role of the Heritage Commission is to assist in the achievement of these goals and in statewide collaborative efforts. So this is why we set this up today, really to try to impact these goals and get some collaboration going, in particular toward a focus on Latino history. So we've seen many groups come together with many specific emphasis on history, and we know that people around the state are finally working on documenting, preserving, and sharing Latino history in the state, but we don't see much collaboration or coordination in those efforts. People are kind of going it alone. And we thought it would be nice to bring people together who care about this and see if we can provide some sort of mechanism for us to collaborate more and maybe improve our results. So we know that there's a long history, an important history in Oregon of Latinos and their impacts here. But this history has been long overlooked and under-researched and interpreted. Some people and organizations, as I said, are working on this, but very in isolated ways. Today, we're hoping to bring everyone together to explore the breadth of what is Latino history and the ways people interested in furthering this work can collaborate and coordinate. We reached out to Latinos in Heritage Conservation, a national organization, because they're doing similar work on a national level. And they were very interested in working with us on this and are going to help facilitate today. So we have Desiree Aranda, Cultural Resources Consultant, and Sarah Delgadillo Cruz, a preservation planner for City of Los Angeles. And they have stepped up to really help this morning. They've put a lot of thought and planning and conversation into the work in advance of this, and I am so grateful to hand it off to them now to take us through the morning.
Great, thank you so much, Curry. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll do introductions. Share screen. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Thank you so much for being here. Sarah and I are so excited to be here, and we were really excited when Curry reached out to us over a year ago now. As she mentioned, we initially planned to be there in person, but due to the pandemic, obviously, we're happy to join you all virtually. My name is Desiree. I'm a co-chair of Latinos and Heritage Conservation, and also a co-founder. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona, and I work as an independent cultural heritage and planning consultant. My training is in planning, and since we're going to be spending 3 hours today together, a little bit more about my background. After graduating from the University of Arizona in planning with a degree in planning, I moved to San Francisco and worked for San Francisco Heritage, which is a local historic preservation advocacy organization. And then I went on to work for the City of San Francisco Planning Department. And most of my work in San Francisco was around cultural heritage associated with communities of color. I worked a lot with the Latino community, also with the Asian American Pacific Islander, African American community projects in various capacities. So I'll turn it over to Sarah so she can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be part of today's program. I am also part of Latinos and Heritage Conservation. I serve as the secretary of the board. And just to share a little bit about myself, I practice in the Office of Historic Resources within the Department of City Planning for the City of Los Angeles. My background was in heritage conservation studies, and I've also done an internship with the National Park Service out of the San Francisco office, helping identify and further research in-house based off of heritage initiatives that the National Park Service has and related to underrepresented communities. In my capacity with the City of Los Angeles, I help with the maintenance of Survey LA historic resources data and the management of Historic Places LA. One of my passions is the conservation of places, sites, and bits of of culture that are associated with underrepresented communities, and that's what inspires a lot of my work with Latinos and Heritage Conservation, and I'm really glad to join you all today.
Thank you, Sarah. So we want to hear from you. I know some of you, when you're logging in, started entering, where you're from or your affinity to Oregon. We're in a virtual world, so maybe you're not physically there, but we'd love to hear, where you're from or what town, city in Oregon you're representing, and if you have an organization affiliation, please let us know, and we can all take a look at that. But again, thank you so much for being here. So we have a 3-hour program. I'll just review the agenda briefly so you all know what you're getting yourselves into. So Sarah and I will lead off with a presentation about Latinos and Heritage Conservation, or LHC for short, kind of our origins, our history, our approach to heritage conservation. Sarah and I are both, not from Oregon. Neither of us have lived in Oregon, and so that's our full disclaimer. But the purpose of really sharing about our organizational history and some of the efforts that those involved with LHC have been involved with over the years is to provide kind of an example of different types of heritage projects and approaches. And we hope after this event that we do have more representation and partnerships and relationships with folks in Oregon. So that's really exciting to us. And then we'll hear from actual people who are living and working in Oregon around Latino heritage, around heritage more generally, the Historical Society, and they'll provide information about different resources for Latino heritage in the state. We'll have a break after that. And once we come back, we will have a breakout session where all of you will be able to meet each other and share any additional information about events or initiatives, programs happening in Oregon related to Latinx heritage conservation.
Sorry to interrupt you, Desiree. Did you mean to share the agenda? We don't see the presentation change. Sorry.
You see it now?
We only see the cover page of the slideshow.
Oh. You bring my presentation to the front. Let me stop sharing really quick and try to do it again. Okay. Can you see the agenda? Yes, okay. All right, sorry about that. So this is the second slide. I guess you didn't see the first one. But once we come back from our break, we'll have a first breakout session, then we'll have a second set of presentations from representatives from the Women's History Consortium and Oregon Folklife Network to provide an example of what heritage-based organizing programming can look like. Again, food for thought. This event is intended to spark a conversation. There are no specific outcomes that we're expecting. It's very open, and that's where when we get into the second breakout session with a discussion around is there a need for a coordinated effort or strategy? What would that look like? Who would be involved, etc. And then we'll wrap up by 11:30. So before Sarah and I kind of delve into the history, origins, and programs of Latinos and heritage conservation, we'd like to do a grounding exercise, again, because not all of us are maybe physically in Oregon, or we just want to hear from you. Where are the places, Latino landmarks, places, sites in Oregon that are important to you, that you think are worthy of preservation? Or what aspect of Latinx heritage in Oregon do you wish you knew more about? And feel free to place your answer in the chat box. Since I'm sharing my screen, I'll ask Sarah if you might be able to read some of the responses.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. We'll just give you a minute to do that. I, for one, am just excited to learn about Latinx heritage and what's going on there in terms of, projects, initiatives, efforts to document. As I mentioned, that is a state that we haven't really touched much in terms of our programming, board representation. So.
Janice still says that her favorite place is the site of the former Colegio Cesar Chavez. Israel Pastrana says my favorite Latinx place in Oregon is M&M Market in Hillsboro. Eliza mentions that PCUN offices, training center, and radio station are among my favorite landmarks in Oregon. I also love the Mercado in Southeast Portland. I wish I knew more about the Oregon Latinx history that community members find important. Kylie Pine mentions that the site and hope to learn more section housing on our grounds. The experience of traqueros in the mid Willamette Valley. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Sherry says downtown Woodburn.
It's pronounced Willamette.
Willamette. Thank you. Downtown Woodburn seems to have a couple of votes.
Thank you so much. If more ideas come to your mind, please feel free to share. And please utilize the chat feature, if you have questions We do have a lot to get through today, so we didn't leave a whole lot of time for questions. So if you have them, I think that the chat might be the easiest way to go about addressing those. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for your responses and indulging us with that activity. So who is LHC? Who are we? So LHC was formed in 2014, and this is a photo of our first national gathering together in 2015 in Tucson, Arizona. And the idea was sparked by myself and my coworker at the time, Laura Dominguez, when we were on staff at San Francisco Heritage. We are very much inspired, and I'll share a little bit more later about from Asian American Pacific Islanders and Heritage Conservation, APIA HIP, which was formed in 2011, I believe. So they're a little bit older than us, and had many active members in San Francisco. And we, Laura and I, attended a presentation or meeting that they had there back in 2014, and we left that meeting thinking like we need to do this for the Latino community. So what do? We here's our vision statement. But we work to preserve essentially Latino places, sites, properties, but also cultural heritage communities. We built a wide and diverse network of intergenerational advocates. And so we have advocates of many different generations. We have scholars, we have professionals in the field of heritage conservation. We also have people in allied fields such as museums, cultural workers, community planners, people who work in affordable housing. So we take pretty much a very broad approach to planning, and we see it as a way to preserve our communities overall. As I mentioned, we were very much inspired by APIA HIP. Here's a photo of them in Cucamonga, California. The founder over on the right, Bill Watanabe. If you're a planner or interested in like community preservation, his work in Little Tokyo is really impressive, and I highly suggest looking into that around community. He did a lot of work around community ownership of properties and kind of stemming or mitigating displacement. There's Michelle Magalong in the center there. She's their current executive director and another really great leader in the field. So our group, we're not the first group of people to come together and try to preserve Latino heritage or important places. We're part of a very long lineage of that type of organizing and efforts. So one quintessential example that Sarah and I both really wanted to share, kind of open with, is the example of Chicano Park in San Diego. Some of you might be familiar with the story, but assuming, I can never assume everyone has heard of the story. Chicano Park is essentially it's a park, a public open space in Barrio Logan or Logan Heights in San Diego. And it's located under a bridge, under the Coronado Bay Bridge. The freeway was constructed there in the 60s as part of the freeway expansion movement and urban renewal that was happening around that time, which unfortunately targeted communities of color throughout the country in many cities and had the effect of displacing many people and often split neighborhoods, functioning neighborhoods in half. And so that was the case in Logan Heights, which was a largely Mexican-American community since the 1930s. And during and after World War II, many kind of toxic land uses, such as junkyards and other undesirable uses, were kind of dumped there essentially in that neighborhood, without concern of the people there. Again, this is something we see in urban planning history in communities of color all across the country. And so finally in 1970, this area that was promised to the community as an open space was actually slated to put, or the city slated to put a highway patrol station there. And a young man, saw what was going on, saw construction kind of being prepared for the area and found out what was happening, told some Chicano studies students at City College what was happening and said, what are you going to do about it? And the young people got together, they organized, they brought 200 to 300 people out to the park, or to the future park. And you can see the photo all the way to the left-hand side. People protesting, and they actually physically took over, they call it the takeover of Chicano Park. They occupied the park. They took over the bulldozers, raised the land, installed plants, painted the pillars. And you can see the center left photo there. Barrio C, Yonques no, that means junkyard, so they don't want junkyards or other places like that. And they really made it a community space. And each year on April 22nd, there's a big celebration, which is depicted on the right there. And one of those, the youth who started organizing for Chicano Park back in the 70s was Josie Talamantes, who went on to become a very successful arts administrator, worked for the California Arts Council for many years, and also earned a degree in public history. And her master's thesis was a National Register nomination for Chicano Park. And eventually that was approved. And so it was one of the first, places listed on the National Register associated with 20th century Latino history. And it later became, in 2017, became a National Historic Landmark, which is our nation's highest kind of level of honor designation for historic significance. So when Laura Dominguez and I, brainstormed this idea for a national network similar to APIA-HIP, Josie was one of the first people I reached out to. She happens to be a family friend as well. My mother's a muralist. And if you're Latino, you probably have artists in your family. It's very, art and music culture is very important to us. And there are a lot of artists and a lot of overlap. Several of our board members happen to be, we met through kind of arts circles. So other folks we reached out to were involved. At the time, there was also, there really was like an ecosystem being developed around Latino heritage. And so I want to acknowledge some of those efforts. And they're important to know about too, I think, if you're, doing this work. So at the time, during the Obama administration, Ken Salazar was appointed as Secretary of the Interior. And he was the first Latino Secretary of the Interior. And he commissioned a national study called American Latinos and the Making of the United States. And that was published in 2013, I believe. And several of our future board members and co-founders were involved with that effort. So Ray Rast, Antonia Castañeda, Luis Hoyos, Belinda Faustinos were all involved in that. And that's a really important document to know about. It's available online. You could Google it, look at the National Park Service website. The National Trust for Historic Preservation, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization that works nationally. Also, they had a staff person named Tanya Bowers, who was doing a lot of work around diversity, equity, inclusion, and historic preservation. She organized a series of conversaciones throughout the country, bringing together community leaders, architects, planners, and others around similar to the conversation we're having today, people who are interested in this type of work, and brought them together. So another one of our co-founders is in that photo somewhere, Ed Torres. And Tanya was another person I reached out to right away. I mentioned the arts. So I met Sarah Gould at the National Association for Latino Arts and Culture. Other board members of ours involved with that, Josie Talamantes, as well as Marta Martinez, who's in Rhode Island. And in California, briefly, I'll just mention, there were a lot of activity happening at the local and the state level. I was in San Francisco, of course, so I'm more familiar with those projects, but also very familiar with some of the work being done in Los Angeles, a lot of crossover ideas. the Los Angeles Conservancy, and then later the Eastside Heritage Consortium worked on, for example, a National Register nomination for the National Chicano Moratorium. The Eastside Heritage Consortium did a community-based survey of important places in East LA. They did a National Register nomination for, California Register nomination for self-help graphics and arts, which was evicted from its building, but so they were able to designate it. Unfortunately, they were not able to stay in their building, but the building itself is preserved and its history is honored. In San Francisco, there was a lot of work around anti-displacement. And so the Calle 24, it was a tour guide. We worked with youth. We also did a citywide historic context statement, which is essentially a citywide study and includes an inventory of places that we think are important for historic designation. And out of that, well, not out of that, the community organized in the Mission District, which was experiencing very high rates of displacement, gentrification, organized to create a cultural district. And that's something if I had more time, I would go into today. But if you're a planner, I saw some of you are involved in planning. That is a really great example to look at, the San Francisco Cultural District program. And it's actually turned into, what started as a grassroots movement, has turned into a citywide program with representatives and departments, not only planning, historic preservation, but community development, affordable housing, economic development, working to create a holistic approach to preserving community. Then we also had the California Office of Historic Preservation, which is like the Oregon Heritage of California, produce a statewide study called Latinos in 20th Century California. And out of that, in the subsequent years, has come multiple National Register nominations. And so that's another great example that I think if Oregon was interested in doing, I highly recommend looking at that example. Other board members of ours are based in Texas. Most of us are based in either California or Texas. A few of us in Arizona. We have someone in Chicago, and we have a few in the East Coast now. We're trying to become more, diverse and representative of our Latino communities. But we have to acknowledge we are very much Mexican American, Southwest kind of origins. So we're trying to expand beyond that. But to highlight some of the work that was being done in Texas, we have to mention the West Side Preservation Alliance, and that was an outgrowth of Esperanza Peace and Justice Center in San Antonio. And they formed, the West Side Preservation Alliance formed to work to preserve the working class Mexican American community in San Antonio. And one example of, there was a major battle to save La Gloria, which was a gas station below, and on the top it was a rooftop bar and dance hall. And the community, as you can see in the photo in the lower left, protested its demolition. It was still demolished. Out of that came the West Side Preservation Alliance. And in the lower right-hand corner, that's a photo from one of the WPA's events. They have an annual Paseo por el West Side. It's a walking tour and also community event, music, culture, arts. They did a really amazing outdoor photo exhibition where they transposed historical photos on historic buildings in the neighborhood. And then the top right-hand photo is a mural that was painted, commissioned by San Antonio Cultural Arts, and it commemorates the leaders of the West Side. And in it you can see, and they did community interviews with people and brainstorms, and you can see La Gloria is painted and commemorated in that mural. And I have to put that in there because that was done by my mom, Valerie. And of course, there's unfortunately still ongoing threats, and this is part of the reason why we LHC came together to continue to fight some of these ongoing demolitions to our historic resources. So in 2013, around when we formed this organization, we had suffered a big loss, the Univision building in San Antonio, which was the birthplace of modern Spanish language television in the United States. And against the protests of the community, yet again, the city found the building to not be historic, not meet the criteria. It was demolished. In the lower right-hand corner, you see Antonia Castañeda, who's one of our co-founders and board members, there being escorted out of the area by police. And as recent as, this is actually ongoing, El Duranguito neighborhood in El Paso, Texas, which is slated for demolition. The city of El Paso, there was a bond measure passed for a cultural arts center, and how they interpreted that is actually a sports and concerts arena, and they decided the best place to put it would be right in the place of a historic Latino neighborhood. So that is, these are the types of threats that we respond to, but also, as I mentioned, we also had a lot of kind of proactive preservation happening, and as well. So our first steps in creating our organization, we put out the call idea to find out if there was interest. We had a series of conference calls. This was in a pre-Zoom world, so we did the old-fashioned way now. We held a session at the Pass Forward National Preservation Conference in Savannah, Georgia. That photo is from that event. And it was there when we decided to hold our own independent national gathering 6 months later. And that idea is credited to Eddie Torres, who just has so much energy and enthusiasm. And so we held that in Tucson. And we also had the benefit of working with a course from the University of Maryland, a graduate historic preservation course taught by Brent Leggs from the National Trust. And they helped us put together a really great case statement that have helped us in that initial stage. We also worked with a consultant during our Tucson event, Maribel Alvarez, and she helped us really think through our structure and theories of change and what made most sense for us. And we ultimately decided that we wanted to become a nonprofit organization, but that wasn't something that we initially jumped to right away. We considered other models. So I did want to mention that. And we did get our nonprofit status just last year in 2020, which has opened us up to get funding and apply for grants and things like that. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to tell you more about what we're doing now.
Okay. So I'll start off with sharing with what we do, what does Latinos and Heritage Conservation do. And one of the most significant functions of our organization is bringing our community together. We bring our community together for dialogue among Latinx community members and allies about the resources and places that matter to our communities. We also come together to share stories and strategies for safekeeping such assets while amplifying the key issues and those voices. We also come together to advocate on behalf of our communities in support of policies relating to Latinx heritage and resources. And through our efforts, we aim to connect with colleagues, but also with on-the-ground community members and the efforts there, because a lot of those efforts really conserve and sustain our heritage. There are many in the field who may not be fully aware that their work is indeed heritage conservation and that their work forms part of the broader field of preservation and planning. Since our founding, we have had in-person presence at national and regional conferences. Aside from attending and representing Latinos in heritage conservation, members from our organization have also presented at conferences in multiple states, including, get ready for this, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, Georgia, New York, Texas, California, New Mexico, Florida, Maryland, Rhode Island, and Washington, D.C. And of course, we hope that this list continues to grow. Members of Latinos and Heritage Conservation strongly believe our presence at preservation and related conferences both increases our visibility, it widens our network, and it definitely promotes our ideas. And here are a couple of pictures that summarize our activity. On the upper left is a picture of a couple of LHC board members with Luis Hoyos, who is a California State Historical Resources Commissioner, and Julianne Polanco, who is our State Historic Preservation Officer. And this is after we completed the presentation of a session at the California Preservation Foundation conference titled Challenges of Designating Historic Sites in Marginalized Communities. And the photo below is of a lively small group discussion that took place during the LHC organized session of the 2015 Pass Forward National Conference that took place in Washington, D.C. And to the right is a little collage of our participation in the Dismantle Preservation Virtual Unconference that took place last year. Our co-chair, Sarah Gold, was a speaker for the session that was titled Expanding the Preservation Narrative from Research to Action. And so speaking of national gatherings, of greatest mention are the national gatherings intended to be biannual that have been organized by Latinos and Heritage Conservation, which we believe have aided greatly in the development of our voice, as well as our development as a group and organization. In 2016, Latinos and Heritage Conservation organized its first biannual gathering, and we named it Reunión, and it took place after the Pass Forward conference in Houston, during which our organization led a discussion about Latino preservation efforts for a seminar called The Future of Diversity and Inclusion in Preservation. Reunión, which took place after that Pass Forward conference, took place at Talento Bilingüe, an important Tejano theater space in Houston, right in the heart of Houston's Mexican-American historic sites and places. Through Reunión, LHC sought to grow its national network and help amplify the critical, groundbreaking, community-based preservation work that was taking place. Among the topics discussed and the projects presented were discussions on tangible and intangible heritage, alternative methods of documentation, the current threat at the time of demolition to El Paso's historic downtown Mexican-American barrio, which included long-lived Latino-owned businesses and residences, and this was presented by Dr. Yolanda Chavez Leiva of the University of Texas at El Paso. Also presented was the work of the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center and the West Side Preservation Alliance, and the documentation efforts to preserve San Antonio's Mexican-American, Mexican, and Latino historic working class neighborhoods. For Reunión, Hispanic Access Foundation was a partner. Hispanic Access Foundation partners with the National Park Service for the National Latino Heritage Internship Program, and several students attended Reunión this year. That year, 2016. In 2018, LHC took the national conversation about Latino historic preservation to New England. That 3-day conference on preservation and cultural heritage took place in Providence, Rhode Island. And the event was truly a partnership with host organizations, which included Providence Preservation Society, Providence Art, Culture, and Tourism, and Providence Planning Office, local libraries, Rhode Island Historical Society, and Roger Williams University. The event featured guest speakers from across the country and provided opportunities to meet and exchange ideas with fellow practitioners and advocates for Latino historic preservation. Being aware of the multiplicity of the American Latino experience and those community histories and how they vary, Encuentro truly aimed at bringing more Latino brothers and sisters to the discussion and the drawing board. And moving on to media and publications, Latinos and Heritage Conservation has a free subscription-based quarterly newsletter called La Herencia. We utilize La Herencia to share news and provide updates to our colleagues, allies, and our co-conspirators. Our board members have also been invited to form part of publications. Our co-chair, Sarah Zenaida Gold, contributed an essay to Latinos and Heritage, contributed an essay called Latinos and Heritage Conservation, Establishing a National Vision for American Latinos in Historic Preservation. Her contribution was to the book titled Bending the Future, 50 Ideas for the Next 50 Years of Historic Preservation in the United States. It is a book made up of essays from scholars and practitioners in the field who offer reflections on the future of historic preservation. And here to the left is a snapshot of an article contributed to the National Parks Conservation Association blog by Dr. Ray Rast, where he makes the case that establishing the Cesar E. Chavez National Monument was just the first step. He states that our federal government can do better, but so can we. The march must continue, and our future depends on it. During a time of environmental protection rollbacks, LHC co-founder Laura Dominguez wrote an op-ed for the Los Angeles Times calling out former President Trump's stance on national monuments, something of the 19th century. And in December of 2020, board member Sarah Bronin wrote an op-ed for the Los Angeles Times pointing at ways to fix a national register that primarily reflects white history. So contributing to professional publications and conferences is an important part of our visibility and educational goals as an organization. Through these activities, we are bringing attention to issues that matter to us, our communities, all the while demonstrating our growing presence in this field. Latinos and Heritage Conservation also engages in legislative and other types of preservation advocacy. We write letters of support and provide testimony for Latinx properties that are being considered for historic designation or possibly proposed for demolition. We've weighed in on changes to historic preservation policy or guidelines. We've also issued advocacy alerts to encourage others to raise their voices on important issues. And most recently, we've advocated for Latinx preservation and federal appointments related to historic preservation. Recently, we also supported Deb Haaland's appointment as Secretary of the Interior. We've also had unique programs. Shortly after the Encuentro in 2018, this is a follow-up to mural conservation conversations that were taking place, and also in celebration of Latino Heritage Month. For this event, Latinos and Heritage Conservation led a heritage meetup in Los Angeles to facilitate a conversation about how communities can come together to preserve historic murals and to prevent the erasure of our stories. In many Latinx communities across the US, murals have been catalysts for social change. And yet many of those post-war works of art are vanishing as a result of gentrification, insensitive development, and lack of maintenance. On a sunny afternoon, those that attended the meetup toured the Great Wall of Los Angeles, which had recently been listed in the National Register. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Great Wall of Los Angeles, the Great Wall of Los Angeles is a pretty huge mural. It is a half-mile long mural that depicts the history of California. It was completed between the years of 1974 and 1984 in a flood channel, literally a flood channel. It was completed by youth under the direction of Chicana artist Judy Baca and the Social Public Art Resource Center. The mural narrates diverse stories of struggle, cultural achievement, and progress. LHC members, including Chicano Park's Josie Talamantes, presented the history and significance of community murals at this event, and also the recent efforts to landmark important murals in Southern California. And after this on-site exploration of the mural, those that attended caravanned to the nearby restaurant Casa Vega, which is a beloved Mexican restaurant that has roots in 1930s Olvera Street in Los Angeles. And 2020 was truly a year of opportunity for Latinos and Heritage Conservation. We are accustomed to working collaboratively and remotely. So organizing and facilitating programs on an online platform really permitted us access to a wider audience than ever before. In October, we partnered with the National Parks Conservation Association, the Cesar Chavez Foundation, the National Park Service, and the Hispanic Access Foundation for a free webinar to share the story of the Cesar Chavez National Monument. and the ongoing efforts aimed at achieving social justice and the commemoration of labor and civil rights history. In December, LHC organized its first online fundraiser to benefit its freshly inaugurated internship program. The program meant to underscore that advocating for allyship and diversity is necessary, but it's not sufficient. A panel of experienced scholars and practitioners presented strategies drawn from their respective careers in the profession to attempt to answer how we can better dismantle structural racism and other oppressions in our work and related sectors. And it was a great program, and it's available for you to watch on our YouTube channel. And the Cesar Y. Chavez National Monument webinar is also available for free to watch through Vimeo. And most recently, LHC's co-founders were invited to be part of an exhibit at the Dumbarton House called Power and Preservation. This exhibit features 10 women making an impact. It is a celebration of the role that women have historically played and continue to play in the broad field of preservation. 3 of the 10 women are our co-founders, Desiree, Laura, and Sarah. The exhibit is still up, and you're welcome to check it out. It can actually be experienced in person and online. And we have a couple of projects in the works. In spring 2022, we will hold our 4th national convening and the first in the Intermountain region. This gathering will highlight the impressive range of work being done regionally, showcasing work in Denver, Colorado, and surrounding Southwestern states. And we truly hope you can join us. Also in the works is the Abuelas Project. The Abuelas Project is a new multi-year digital preservation initiative that we are starting. We attempt to collect, curate, and amplify place-based stories in Latinx communities. We have received a grant from the National Trust to undertake the strategic planning for this effort, as well as the research and the development of the project. For more information, please stay tuned and subscribe to La Herencia, which is where we will likely be sharing the information and as well through our website. So thus far, we have several accomplishments. We've attained 501c3 status. We've presented multiple advocacy letters. We've been awarded a grant from the National Trust. We've inaugurated an internship program. We've held our first online fundraiser, mind you, a successful fundraiser. And we've also increased our online presence through social media. So now what I'm going to do is share a little bit more. I see the chat, and just to make sure, I'm going to open the chat for just a second to make sure. Oh, thank you. Sorry for that pause. I just wanted to make sure that none of the messages were about Sarah. We can't see your screen. Okay, so I want to share a little bit more about our approach to heritage conservation. To delve into this a little bit deeper, we feel that our approach is intended to reconceptualize what should be recognized, conserved, and valued as part and parcel of our nation's historic fabric. We work from few definitions. The first is historic preservation, which is defined as an endeavor that seeks to preserve, conserve, protect buildings, objects, landscapes, traditions, and other artifacts, both tangible and intangible, of historical significance. And the Pan American Bank in East Los Angeles is an example of what we would consider historic preservation. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too deep into the history of the site. We also work from the definition of heritage conservation. Really, heritage conservation is about belonging. It encompasses tangible heritage, which includes our barrios, our churches, our sites of significant events, the built environment that tells our story. It also encompasses intangible heritage, which includes our inherited traditions, our songs, our recipes, dances, and other cultural and artistic expressions and practices. These are all elements of who we are and how we identify ourselves, and they place us within the fabric of the larger American landscape. To say, and here an example of Teatro Carmen in Tucson, it was the first Spanish language cinema, but besides that, it housed a lot more than that, and it was a lot more than just the building. It was about the practices and things that took place there. We also work a lot with the definition of social justice. We truly believe that our work is a means of achieving social justice. And our work is essentially an act of social justice. Heritage conservation underlines inclusion from the types of places that are being preserved to the people who are contributing to the field, to existing policies and programs. Our practice and how we practice conservation comes from a perspective that's conscious of the context of civil rights movements, the early stages of the environmental movement, as well as other efforts to ensure greater social and cultural equity. And next, I'm going to very succinctly go over a couple of case studies of sites, places that have been worked on by our colleagues that truly align with our perspective and the values of Latinos in heritage conservation. So I'll go ahead and get started. So the first one, the first example that I'm sharing with you is Rio Vista Farm in Socorro, Texas. The efforts to name Rio Vista Farm in Socorro, Texas was undertaken by the National Park Service. I'm sorry, not the National Park Service, the National Trust. And it was named a national treasure in 2016. The effort and that campaign to name it a national treasure was to advocate for the preservation and reuse of the site, the documentation, the designation of it, as well as the promotion of it as a heritage tourism place. At over 100 years old, Rio Vista Farm began as a poor farm. It sheltered children during the Great Depression and was a point of entry for the Bracero program. The property and remaining buildings are the last known standing Bracero processing center and a testament of an often overlooked American experience. The stories and the contributions of the many skilled Mexican guest workers that were brought to the US to aid with farm labor shortages across America during and after World War II. So per year from 1951 to 1964, more than 80,000 braceros passed through Rio Vista. The 22-year program that is described by many as legalized slavery bused guest workers to agricultural areas of the 30 states that participated in the program. And many braceros repatriated after the contracts ended. However, millions of Mexican Americans can trace their roots to their fathers or grandfathers' entry into the United States as braceros. And advocacy and fundraising efforts from the National Trust and surrounding Rio Vista continue to today. An example from Miami, Florida. We do have some examples of heritage districts in California, as Desiree mentioned earlier in the presentation. And I'm going to highlight one such district in Miami, Florida, which is Little Havana, and it was named a national treasure in 2017. The organization that's leading this effort alongside government agencies is State Heritage Trust, which has worked with the City of Miami and the National Trust, and leading the efforts to conserve that naturally occurring affordable housing in Little Havana with funding from the county. Miami-Dade Trust has purchased and restored buildings in Little Havana to preserve the building, but also preserve the affordability and also improving the living conditions for the tenants. Little Havana is Miami's Ellis Island, and it's a thriving, healthy, and culturally rich urban neighborhood. It is the place where generations of people have launched their American journey. The neighborhood is a symbol of inclusiveness and a testament of the immigrant spirit that built our nation, and an affordable neighborhood that continues to house thousands of Miamians. The community and people-first approach and preservation here emphasizes that culturally rich places and Latinx neighborhoods like Little Havana are historically significant because of the communities they sustain, avoiding displacement and ensuring that Little Havana will continue to thrive into the future is a people-based approach and a conservation of the heritage and the vibrancy that takes place in Little Havana and attempting to conserve it for the benefit of the community. Another example is Casa Amadeo, which is the oldest continuously run music store It is listed in the National Register. It was listed in 2001. It is the oldest continuously run music store in New York City, but it also happens to be a Latino music store. It has been in business since the 1940s, and it is one of the few remaining intact sites that is connected to New York City's post-war Latin music scene. It is also the first National Register listing that recognizes Puerto Rican migration history. And it is also the first place that is connected to mainland Puerto Rico heritage to be listed. It was nominated through a multifaceted community-focused project called Mambo to Hip Hop. And it was the focus of the project itself was to transform the distinctive musical heritage of the Latino South Bronx into a resource for cultural and civic renewal. The project came through a partnership between the organization Place Matters and a South Bronx community-based nonprofit. Another site that I wanted to highlight today is the Silver Dollar Cafe. It is now listed on the National Register, but it was not the case for a very long time. The Silver Dollar Cafe is connected to the Chicano moratorium that took place in March of 1970 in unincorporated Los Angeles County. It is a prime example of a property that is associated with a singular historic event that came to symbolize the struggle for Latino civil rights that occurred during the Chicano moratorium. The Silver Dollar Cafe is the site where the respected journalist Ruben Salazar was killed. Salazar became a martyr for American Latinos, although some criticized his reporting during his lifetime. His death drew attention to the tensions between law enforcement officials and Chicano activists and truly motivated many to join the civil rights movement. The community has long recognized the site's importance and advocated for opportunities to tell its story. Initially, designation seemed impossible due to integrity issues, and after much time and consideration, when nominated as part of the moratorium trail, the property was designated in 2020, just last year. An example of oral history is Nuestras Raíces. Nuestras Raíces is the Latino Oral History Project of Rhode Island. It started in 1991 and has been managed by the organization Rhode Island Latino Arts. Since it started, the project has become a wide range collection of personal stories, photos, and pieces of paper documenting the history of Rhode Island's Spanish-speaking community. The project's mission is to collect, share, and celebrate the diverse experiences through the voices of Latinos in Rhode Island. And lastly, we wanted to provide you with a slide to identify funding sources for such projects. There are opportunities for funding from the National Park Service through competitive grants, as well as through national agencies and organizations. And that's also not mentioning the state and regional funding opportunities that may come from other agencies and organizations. So we're going to go ahead and transition here. Go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to call on Desiree.
Thanks. I was just responding to a question. There we go. Okay, so now, thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. And you know, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to address them as we can. But we do want to keep things moving. It's 9:30, right on the dot, and we now have a presentation. Or a series of presentations rather from statewide, from current statewide resources for Latino heritage. And I would like to invite our first presenter is Natalia Fernandez from Oregon State University, Oregon Multicultural Archives. So thank you for joining us, Natalia, and we'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am going to share my screen. Let me see if I can get to the desktop. I'm actually not, oh, there we go. To open my slides and just do a quick test to make sure everyone can see. And are the slides advancing for everyone else?
Yes.
Wonderful. And for those of you who like to take notes, I do plan to share a PDF of the presentation with my notes. So as I move quickly through my information, please know that I will share it out with everyone so you have it. Okay, well, let's begin. My name is Natalia Fernandez, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently the interim director for the Special Collections and Archives Research Center at Oregon State University. I am the curator of the Oregon Multicultural Archives, the OMA, and the OSU Queer Archives, the OSQA or OSQA. My mission for the OMA and the OSQA is to work in collaboration with Oregon's communities of color and OSU's LGBTQ+ communities to support them in preserving their histories and sharing their stories. My work as an archivist includes collection development, instruction, exhibit curation, and public programming. The OSU Library's Special Collections and Archives Research Center is located on the OSU Corvallis campus. The OMA was established in 2005, and I became the OMA curator in late 2010. The OSU Queer Archives was established more recently in 2014, and I am currently in the process of co-establishing the OSU Disability Archives. And I share both of these more recent collection initiatives as examples of my approach to my archival work, which is community-centered and led by members of the communities themselves through community liaisons as project leads. And I am here to offer my guidance, support, and leadership as works best for the communities with which I'm collaborating. I strive to use my position at OSU to empower LGBTQ+ and communities of color to retain control of their histories and use the archives to highlight their impact on past and present histories, and to educate community members about their stories. While the OMA and the OSQA are not community archives as they are housed within an institution's archival repository, I am inspired by the literature within the archival profession, literature which is growing every year, on community archiving that speaks to the importance of archival representation, community autonomy, and the intersection between community-based activism and archivists. As archivists, cultural heritage professionals, and scholars, it is essential for us to know that while archival records can symbolize healing and reconciliation, they can also support and perpetuate oppression. So we can participate in the cause of social justice and anti-racist work, as Sara was sharing, through the materials we select for preservation, the collaborations in which we choose to engage, and by opening the archives to diverse perspectives and multiple voices. And as you will hear from the other speakers today as part of this gathering, I think that this approach to the work that we do is very much a commonality among all of us, among lots of archivists and cultural heritage keepers in the state. So one of the reasons we're all here is because we know that there are gaps in the historical record in terms of the stories and experiences of people of color in Oregon, and specifically for Oregon's Latinx communities. As an archivist, I seek to address those gaps and to support communities to share their stories. And through the OMA, I offer the opportunity to make community stories accessible to the public and preserve them for future generations. As many archival repositories are, we are open to the public and anyone is welcome to use our collections. Much of our content is only accessible in person, but over time, we are able to make more content accessible online. And especially during our current context of the pandemic, we are accommodating more remote reference inquiries. And of course, we hope that in the coming months, we will be able to open up again with less restrictions to the public. So within the OMA, we have several Latinx community archival collections. And just to give you some examples of what we have, We have collections such as the Braceros program photographs collections from the 1940s, the research papers of Professor Erlinda Gonzalez Berry, who wrote the book Mexicanos in Oregon, the Milagro Records collection, which documents the history of the Portland-founded and established theater group, a collection of documents and photos of a family connected to the Colegio Cesar Chavez, materials from the Cesar Chavez Centro Cultural at OSU, and a collection of materials of an activist who advocated for the rights of migrant workers through his work for the Bureau of Land and Labor and Industries in the 1980s and 90s. And as is common with many archival collections, these collections include materials such as photographs, personal papers, and organizational records. Was mentioned earlier, oral history collections. Oral history collections are an amazing way for communities to share their stories. And we have a number of collections that have come together through collaborations with community organizations, as well as partnerships with Oregon State professors and students. As some examples, the Milagro Oral History Collection is a complement to the Milagro Records and focuses on the individuals associated with the theater. The Gonzalez Berry papers include a set of oral histories that she used to write her book. And some of the interviews in various collections are the result of student assignments, community projects, and interviews that I have conducted as well. And speaking of partnerships to develop oral history collections, over the years, I have worked with a variety of organizations in which I have conducted oral history interviews with community members, and I have also used a train the trainer model for community members as well as OSU students to use. My current collaborations include supporting the Milagro Theater in their oral history project, as well as working with Dr. Joel Zapata in his project planning. Dr. Zapata is a recently hired assistant professor within OSU's history program, and he has a specific focus on public history and oral history within Oregon's Latinx communities. And I'm very excited that both Jose Gonzalez of the Milagro Theater and Dr. Zapata are with us today. So it'll be great to get their perspectives as part of our gathering. And documenting the stories is critical, but another component of this work is to showcase and share the stories gathered. And this can come in a variety of forms. And just as two short examples, in the mid-2010s, the OMA curated a bilingual exhibit featuring the story of Milagro. We used materials from the archival collection, along with artifacts on loan from the organization. And a few years ago, I connected with an OSU ethnic studies major and community activist who was looking for a capstone project idea for her social justice minor. I had worked with her before on an oral history project and told her about the Latinos in Oregon oral history collection. And she listened to the interviews and was particularly drawn to the stories about childhood games and decided to create a loteria set based on the themes she heard in the interviews. And we collaborated with the OSU Juntos program to have the sets created to give to all the Juntos communities across the state. And the interviews were conducted through the Juntos program with community members from that program. So it was a really lovely way to be able to give back to the community. And last but not least, my contact information is on the screen. And as you will hear from the other speakers today, the OMA is just one of a variety of resources across the state. And I'm just very much looking forward to the conversations planned for this gathering and look forward to what comes next for all of us, because I think we're doing amazing work individually, as was shared earlier, and I think collaboratively we can do even more. So thank you so much. I'm happy to answer questions maybe at the end or as part of the conversation this afternoon if anyone has questions, or later this morning, excuse me. Thank you. I'll stop share.
Thank you, Natalia. That was great to learn about OMA. Next, I would like to present our next speaker, Gabriela Martinez and Lynn Steven from Latino Roots of the University of Oregon.
Thank you very much. Let's see, can I share my screen now? Okay. All right, I'm on a new computer, so. Gabby, could you do me a favor and share your screen and just go to the classes website? I'm on a new computer and I have to facilitate screen sharing. Thank you very much to the organizers of this. And I also really appreciate learning about what's going on across the country as well as Oregon, and great to hear from Natalia. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Latino Roots Project at the University of Oregon. This is a project that really is creating and mentoring future preservers and promoters of Latino heritage at the University of Oregon. My colleague, Gabriela Martinez, and I began this project in 2010 and 2011. And it's a project that combines two sort of intensive courses with about 20 to 24 students per year, and prepares them not only in learning sort of a deep history of the state of Oregon, a non-white history primarily because they've already learned that, and centering a sort of deeper Latinx history, but also trains them in how to produce documentary films, but in fact also how to work with archives. So this is a project that involves special collections at the University of Oregon. It involves the Department of Anthropology, Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies, the School of Journalism and Communication, our students, and then also creating resources, student-created resources through their own work that are up on a public platform. And Gabriela will spend more time talking about that. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the pedagogy model. And I really appreciate what Sarah Delgado said about social justice, because I think we also look at this as a social justice project. We look at it as a way to put Latinx history on the map, embed it not only in the U of O curriculum, but provide curriculum materials for K through 12 and college and community college people who need these resources. So just a brief rundown of the classes. The classes are two parts. We teach them every other year in the winter and spring, and we've done, I think, 5 classes. We'll be doing the 6th generation of Latino Roots next year. And we did our first virtual Zoom version last year, which was kind of interesting. But so it's a graduate and undergraduate class. It's also an interesting sort of mentoring experience. We usually get 4 to 5 grad students, MA, PhD students, and then upper level undergraduates that work with us. And the first part of the course, it's 10 weeks. We're on a quarter system. We start really in about 1400. We start with Oregon's native peoples and Oregon as a native territory. And then we look at really that history from that point in time. We talk about native peoples, we talk about settler colonialism, Spanish colonialism, and really we try to take apart the boundaries that have been put on Oregon and look at how those were constructed through time with settler states and the US as a settler state. And then also really lift up Black history in the state, Asian history in the state, and of course, Latinx history and Native history. We spend about 5 weeks doing that. Students narrate their own story. They write their own story first and they share that in class. And that is kind of a centering exercise that gets everyone together. Then we teach students how to do oral history interviews. We model it and they go out and through connections they have, often in their own families, in their own communities, or through high school, or sometimes with our assistants, they choose one person's Latinx story to tell in Oregon, and they audio record an interview, then they transcribe that interview, and then they also to have some meetings with special collections and the archive at the U of O to learn how the archive works. And then they write basically a film treatment based on that interview. And the second quarter, when there's not a pandemic, and last year we did it virtually, we meet in the Cinema Studies Lab, or we met on Zoom, and basically work with them to create a 10-minute documentary film that is bilingual in Espanol and Inglés. They subtitle, they shoot a lot of B-roll, and they also collect photographs that they scan, and they deposit, they use a deed of gift. There are many forms that students have to work with in this class, but they have the person they're working with, their participants, sign a deed of gift, and they gift scans, high quality scans of the photographs, the transcript, and the video to the library. So the University of Oregon Special Collections now has their 82 of these stories in a video form that's online, but there also are all of these other materials collected, with the stories that include the transcripts of the long interview that, maybe an hour long, and the audio file. And then we also have a celebration at the end of the year. We had a virtual one last year, but we bring together the students, their families, the participants who were in the videos. We invite people from the Eugene Springfield community, usually have the Springfield High School Mariachi Band, a lot of good food, and have a party, celebrate together. And last year we did it online, and it was kind of amazing. We had, I think, more than 100 people. We often have a social justice Latinx activist speak at our event, the university president. And last year we did it with breakout rooms. So that's a little bit of the context of how we create these materials. And now Gabriela is going to kind of tour you through some of them. I was going to highlight a 1-minute video clip, which I probably won't. Gabriela will be doing one, but it was by Emily Chavez Romero. She's a DACA student, and it highlights sort of her story. And she's now turning that into a full-length documentary film. So I'll stop there and turn it over to my colleague, Gabriela.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, everybody, for attending this morning. And thank you to the organizers of this great event. So I just want to tour you through our website. I hope everybody can still see it here. And maybe at the end, if we have time, I'll show like maybe a 30-second or a minute clip, so you get a sense of the website. So if you go to the home page, you will have the genesis of the project. And actually the course, as Lynn mentioned it, began in 2010, 2011, but the project itself began in 2009 when the state of Oregon was turning 150 years. So we did this project for the original project for the Lane County Historical Museum. And we thought that this was going to be there only for about 3 months. It turned out to be there for almost a little bit over a year. And that's when we decided to turn it into a course. So you can read all of that in this page. You have all the history. You have a booklet that it's downloadable. This booklet, you can download that for you or for your students or organization. It's here, so you can download that. And then you have the course description, which you already probably read a little bit about it, as my colleague was talking about. And then we have the video documentary gallery. And as Lynn mentioned already, we have 82 stories here that we just revamp our website to make it more, aligned with the times and the technology and different platforms. So you can see this on your computer. You can stream this to your classrooms if you are a teacher, or you can just watch it on your cell phone. So it accommodates to all different platforms. And we have divided class by class. So you have the latest one was in 2020. 2017, 2015, 2013, and 2011, which was the first class. And it's basically like going to Netflix, right? You can just go across and see what would you like to see. Now, in our last iteration of our course, we also included multimedia documentaries so that you can not only watch the documentary, but you have, you know, a full story that it's multimedia. And we did that because we were teaching basically through Zoom. And so for some people, it was easier to do a multimedia documentary. And they have done an excellent work. All the students have done really good work. So I will invite you, I will put on the chat later the link to the Latino Roots, or if you can just Google Latino Roots .uoregon.edu, you'll get our website. And last but not least, this is our new thing in our revamp website. It's the exhibition panels. Some of you may know this because these panels have been across the state. We have over 60,000 people who have been exposed to these different panels and through exhibitions. So these are full-size panels that can go to museums, to high schools, middle schools, colleges, but we have digitized all of them and created this version that it's online where you can download any of these panels and print it at home or print it in your school. If you are a teacher or if you are in a museum, you can have activities with people who are visiting your museum or your organization and have them download these and print them. And they are high enough quality that you can print it to have really large versions or just in a regular page, 12 page for homework. So I think that this is kind of the what we have, and then we have obviously our partners. And if you go to OSU Digital Collections, as Natalia was explaining, you can access all of that. We also have the all of our documentation and movies at the UO library, and you can also access through that some of these materials. And the last thing that I want to do I have a minute? I just want to run over our other colleagues to show a clip just to give a sense of the work students are doing. Desiree, do I have a minute?
Yeah, go ahead. We can break after this. So
okay, great. So what I wanna show you, and I wanna also call attention that the Latino experience in Oregon is super diverse, and this project tries to showcase that. We tried that our students understand that Latinos come from, in different shapes, forms, colors, languages, and all of that, right? And we have documented people who are farm workers, people who are teachers, university professors. Also, we were very lucky in our last class to have to make a documentary about Jose Gonzalez from Teatro Milagro, who's attending the sessions today. And we also have politicians, and the first Latino female politician who is the representative for District 22, Teresa Alonso. It's also in our site. And I want to show you just 1 minute of this story of Maria Bené Santos to also show that we are not only documenting people who speak Spanish or indigenous, but also people who come from the Portuguese world of Latin America. So just put this.
Então, acho que desde criança eu gostava de ensinar. Meu pai e minha mãe sempre me davam bonecas de presente, de Natal, de aniversário, né? Até que num dos meus aniversários, o meu avô me deu um quadro de giz. Aí eu achei o máximo. Aí eu montei aquele quadro e coloquei as bonecas no chão e comecei a dar aula para as bonecas, entendeu? Aí eu fiz daquilo um hábito. Quando eu chegava da escola, em vez de eu fazer como eu fazia antes, tentava imitar as professoras, às vezes olhando para uma parede, eu fazia isso com as bonecas. E aí já estava ali a minha paixão por ensinar.
Caso vá primeiro, não se esqueça.
Bom dia, pessoal. Bom dia. Meu nome é longo, Maria Benedita da Silva Santos.
Okay, I will stop there, and I hope that's a good teaser for you to go to the website and continue watching the story of Bené Santos and many other stories of Latino Oregonians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn and Gabriela, for sharing Latino roots with us. I think that arming young professionals with the skill set to document community history is not just about documenting community history, and you very much so highlighted the themes of self-exploration, and what that can do for a young professional is amazing. So I think that work goes beyond measure. So thanks for sharing that with us. Next, we're going to have Eliza Canty Jones, who's going to be presenting to us Oregon Historical Society.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this incredible program. And I'm really honored to be able to speak along such esteemed colleagues on the panel this morning. I have just a few slides to share. So I think that's working, yeah? Yes, okay. So just to introduce, my purpose this morning really is twofold. One is to give a few examples of the ways that Latinx heritage shows up in the work of the Oregon Historical Society. And also for those examples, I hope to serve as a prompt for thinking about ways that the Oregon Historical Society can be used in this work of statewide program to bring greater understanding about and attention to and research in and education about Latinx history in our state. I often say that OHS is like a giant toolbox. We hold a lot of different kinds of tools, and we are really eager for communities and colleagues around the state to use those tools in the ways that benefit those communities, that benefit those individuals, and also that advance the broad mission of the Oregon Historical Society. So that mission is to preserve our state's history and make it accessible in ways that advance knowledge and inspire curiosity about all the peoples, places, and events that have shaped Oregon. And we do that work with a vision that we build a better future with an Oregon story that is meaningful to all Oregonians. And some of you will recognize that phrase, Oregon story, as one that has often in the past referred to a very narrow range of histories, usually having to do with Lewis and Clark and the pioneers who came over the Oregon Trail. And so our vision is really to have an Oregon story that is integrated and meaningful to everyone. So the work that I do at OHS oversees our journal, the Oregon Historical Quarterly, many of our public programs and community partnerships, and also our K-12 education. And I work with amazing colleagues who lead our museum and research library and all kinds of other work as well. So I'll speak a little bit about the Oregon Historical Society and then some of those tools. The OHS was founded in 1898, and we were founded out of the Oregon Pioneer Association. So we were really founded in a pretty explicitly settler colonialist framework, absolutely shaped by white supremacy. And that founding really shaped a lot of the beginnings of the kind of work we did, the belongings that came into our care that are often referred to as collections. And many of my colleagues who are working with those collections in our research library and in our museum are thinking about and doing a lot of the work that Natalia was talking about, and how to be thinking about how we describe these collections and what we do with these belongings in ways that are attentive to community needs, and how can we reshape the way that they look and appear to the public so that they are knocking down instead of holding up those white supremacist foundations. We're based in Portland, Oregon. We're a private nonprofit, but we also have a lot of public support. The good people of Multnomah County have twice renewed a modest property tax levy that supports OHS. And part of that levy language says that the work we do with that money has to highlight the histories of all the diverse peoples of Multnomah County. So that's been in place for 10 years. It's up for renewal again next month. And it's been a wonderful call for the staff at OHS to say, well, we just have to do this work. And hopefully we are fulfilling that in meaningful ways. Our collections, those belongings that are in our care, are really the foundation of all that we do. They're wide ranging. They are publicly publicly accessible in a lot of different ways, although not equally so, but there's ways to get at them. More and more of the collections are being digitized by my colleagues and made available online. We have a research library that will again be open to the public once renovation is finished and public health makes it safe to do so. And so we're excited to have those collections available. I'll talk about some examples of those as well. We have publications in print and digital that are crucial to advancing and sharing our understanding of the past. These are built on the collections. They're in conversation with other historical publications, and they have drawn on a lot of the work and expertise in instances of the other presenters who have been with us this morning. Our public education, we have many public programs and partnerships and K through 12 resources. We have lectures, panel discussions, cultural events, family day programs, community support through a variety of partnerships that we offer. We do tours for school groups. We have traveling trunks. We do professional development for teachers. We host the Oregon History Day program. We develop curriculum and teacher resources. And we've just established a partnership with Portland Public Schools to write a short series of history books for third graders that will help us, again, integrate this history in meaningful ways. So to talk a little bit more about these, our collections, those belongings that are in our care, include a variety of types of materials, as Natalia was talking about, oral histories that we have specifically related to Latinx history. We have about 38 oral histories from the Nosotros collection. There's also interviews from the Valley Migrant League Oral History Project. There are oral histories produced by students in PSU capstone classes from the mid-2000s. There are interviews with community leaders, including Elida Cifuentes and Sunny Montes. And we also have, over the past several years, established a partnership with The Immigrant Story, which is a newer organization that is amazing. I recommend everybody check out The Immigrant Story. And they have been doing oral histories with immigrants from all over the world who are now making their homes in Oregon. And many of those oral histories are now archived at OHS and on our digital collections website. I'll also note that our partnership with The Immigrant Story extends to exhibits. And last year or the year before, I think I lost a year, like most folks, we had a wonderful exhibit from The Immigrant Story called Dreams Deferred, and it was highlighting stories of dreamers who've come to Oregon. Our photograph collection at OHS is massive. It's in the tens of millions of photographs. We have many photographs from the Valley Migrant League collection that document activities at the community center, including education classes and social events for adults and children, work that's done in fields by laborers, medical care for migrants, and picketing, that social activism that some other folks were talking about. And the date range of those photographs is the mid to late 1960s. We have ephemera. We have records from the Human Relations Council of Yamhill County from the 1960s and 1970s, as well as the Stella Maris House from 1940 through 1973. So these are organizational records that also help us understand ways that people were organizing and providing leadership in the community in the mid 20th century. OHS has these wonderful clippings files. And for many years, volunteers and others clipped newspaper articles that had to do with specific topics. And so we have a couple of files of Hispanics in Oregon is what it's called, clippings file. And I imagine there's some gold in there as well. We have moving images in our collection. Those are film mostly. And one of the things to highlight is we have moving images from a public access program from the 1980s called Ahora Mismo. And so that's a program that some folks may remember. And then also our museum collections include arts and crafts materials from the Oregon Folklife program, which OHS housed in the 1990s and early 2000s. And that is now founded at University of Oregon and the Oregon Folklife Network, which I think folks will have the opportunity to hear about this afternoon. And so we have collections of materials that people who participated in the Traditional Arts Apprenticeship Program created. And there's several different kinds of those materials that OHS takes care of. Our print and digital publications, we've published the Oregon Historical Quarterly since 1900. We have many articles related to Latinx history. We also occasionally publish special issues dedicated to a particular subject or theme in Oregon history. I think the subject of Latinx history, we are absolutely interested in focusing an issue on that history, and think this could be a good way to help promote the efforts that we're talking about this morning. The cover that's on your screen there, the winter 2006 issue, included a story, an article titled "Telling Stories, Building Altars, Mexican-American Women's Altars in Oregon" by Gabriela Ricciardi. We also have published a special issue in winter 2017 on Oregon migrations that included articles by Lynn Steven and Gabriela Martinez, who you heard from this morning. And there are several other articles in OHQ related to this history. OHS also publishes the online Oregon Encyclopedia, which is a compendium of all things Oregon history and culture. There are large essays on broad topics. And so one of those essays is Latinos in Oregon, written by Jerry Garcia. And there are many other articles on people and organizations and more. You can also plot these these entries on the Oregon History Wayfinder, so you can look at where they land all across the state. And then finally, I'll note our public education, our programs and K through 12 work. I wanted to note one of our public programs that we did in a series when we opened our new exhibit, Experience Oregon, which is really a complete reframing of the history of Oregon that is much more inclusive, that is a history that includes Indigenous people from beginning to end, all the way through the timeline. And we did a series of public programs to commemorate the opening of that exhibit in 2019. At one of those, Lynn Steven and Mario Cifuentes spoke about the history of Latinos in Oregon with their program Grounded in This Place. And that's available online on our website and our YouTube channel for folks to watch. And then we also have many K through 12 resources, a traveling trunk, which in regular times goes out to schools, classes, grades 3 through 12, looking at Mexican-American traditional arts and culture. And then also our History Hub exhibit, which is explicitly for younger people. I think the focus is grades 3 through 8. And it features histories such as the Bracero program, the Valley Migrant League, the Hillsborough School District, Mariacha Una Voz performances, as well as many books in the book nook on Latinx and Hispanic history and culture in that exhibit, which also gives an opportunity for people to look at immigration from all over the world to Oregon. So that's just a quick overview for me of the many kinds of tools that are in the OHS toolbox and ways that we are eager to work with folks to bring the resources at the Oregon Historical Society to bear and to be used by community members and activists who are seeking to bring this history into the center and into broader public audiences. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eliza. It was great to hear about the multiple and multitude of resources available through the Oregon Historical Society. I think it's quite important to localize history and bring the local objects and resources to the community. And I think that the traveling trunk is a great thing to bring to schools. So we're going to be taking a quick break here. Let me go ahead and share my screen so we can this here. We're going to be taking a break. Everybody can stretch their legs, grab their coffee or their coffee refill. We're going to be back at 10:20, so taking a 10-minute break. Thank you all again for the great presentations you provided us this morning.
All right, everyone. I think people are coming back into the main group. I know that was really short. We wanted to keep on schedule with our 10:40 slots. So we have 10 minutes together now to kind of share some of the ideas that bubbled up during the discussion. We could just go down group number, or if you want to share something, you can use the little raise your hand feature in the reactions. But maybe let's just start. We had 8 groups. So group 1, did you want to share anything that kind of bubbled up? Maybe like really the answer to any of the questions. You can go either group 1, 2, or 3. Anyone's
I have to admit, I don't know which group I was in.
Okay, no worries.
Do you want me to I can jump in though. Our group talked about, and I need to apologize to my group. I got kicked out of our breakout before we finished talking. So if there's anything that they wanted to add, please, you can just chat to me directly and I'll add it to the notes. But I heard some things about needing to identify ways of collaborating and connecting. It seems like folks in our group recognized that there is a strong Latino population in various communities, but not always the engagement with their organizations that they would like. And they're wanting to learn more strategies for how to connect in meaningful ways and get that kind of amplify the voices of those communities.
Thank you. And another group would like to share a takeaway? You can just unmute yourself.
I can go ahead. You were group 6. I think one of the things we talked about in the beginning of our breakout session was that there are probably local resources and local projects around Latinx history, and that we really need to dig down and identify what those are, maybe starting with some places that have high Latinx populations like Hillsborough, Cornelius, Hermiston, Eugene, and Portland. And another thing I wanted to share right from the end was that we should have more conferences like this, more intentional efforts to identify the different organizations and individuals that can support these projects instead of just it being a one-shot.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to share? I know Israel Pastrana in our group had a lot of good ideas. I don't know if you would be interested in sharing.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Let's see. Can I pop on my video? Well, I'll just turn it off for a second. Yeah. So I'm guest curating an exhibition with Five Oaks Museum that looks at the 2016 walkouts that were led by student activists at Forest Grove High School that really brought awareness, especially to issues of educational inequality and things like ethnic studies here in the state, right? I want to tell that history as a way of kind of narrating longer educational struggles amongst Latinx communities in the county, but also highlighting youth voices. And that opens up all sorts of neat opportunities, right? I'm using Twitter and Instagram as the archive. I'm not focusing on places, but I'm focusing on paths that students took. And so I'm really interested. There's so many great folks in this room. I'm super interested in collaborating with all of you to sort of carry out this exhibition vision that I have. But that, I'm thinking about, right, preservation, we often talk about like a place, right? And we're, thinking about locations and physical buildings. And the intervention that I was trying to make in the small group is that we should also think about like roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, right? That, the historic roots that, activists took in the protests around driver's licenses here in the state, right? The marches down to Salem to the Capitol. Those paths and then having opportunities for folks to revisit them, I think, are a really neat way of engaging with history when we might lack or not have access to like the physical, markers or buildings, right, that other communities might have access to.
Well, going off of that point, I mentioned also in our group that we have some people who are kind of virulently resistant to any kind of like outward expression of your Latino heritage. And so when you actually ask for spaces or places to be to acknowledge your existence, there's this pushback. And then I mentioned that, you know, over the previous federal administration has given a lot of license for people to actually be more bold about their resistance to anybody not demonstrating their Americanness, if you will, in quote. This has made it really challenging for people to actually want to be or feel safe to actually share their narratives and their stories, because it's re-traumatizing a lot of people actually when it comes to having to relive some of these things. And you know, and I mentioned how you know, it's just it's a reality that I think these efforts have to probably take into consideration of what we've just come out of with actually sharing that kind of stuff. Our history and our contributions shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be on the forefront. So.
That's so true, Javier, and I'm so glad you brought that up. And I know myself and some of my other colleagues, you know, we talk about this work being like healing, and especially like healing intergenerational traumas that have happened. And, you know, that kind of relates to the social justice part, but there definitely is that like psychological piece to it, you know, that some people just are not comfortable, not ready to share. And so being sensitive to that as well is really important. Are there other groups? We have like 3 minutes till our next set of presentations, and we'll have a second breakout group.
I'd like to share an example that came from the group that I was in, and I think it speaks to Javier's point and the cathartic practice of commemorating history in today in a post the presidency. In Springfield, the community will soon be painting a mural that actually commemorates the community history and includes flowers and images of the community that exists there, and it's going to be painted in a restaurant, in a place that is in a downtown area that's very visible. And I think that it commemorates the history, but also marks today, and in such a big way, it's a very cathartic way for the community to regain space and regain that collective memory. So definitely wanted to share that.
Okay, anyone else? We have time for maybe one more group to share.
I can share just quickly. One thing that came up in our group was the significance of cultural festivals and different kinds of organizations that preserve dance and other kinds of cultural heritage, and the power of those celebratory events also. And so those as preservation efforts as well. So, and there are many, many examples in Oregon.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for sharing all of those thoughts. If you took notes, please share with us. Hopefully some of you used that Google Doc because we want to save all of these really great ideas. But now it's 10, we're almost at 10:40. So we would like to transition into our second set of presentations. So we have two brief presentations from, one's from the Women's History Consortium, and then the next will be from the Oregon Folklife Network. And then after this, we'll have another discussion session. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and invite Jan and Kim to present, and we'll have the spotlight on them.
And are you able to hear me and see this well?
Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Kimberly Jensen. I'm a professor of history and gender studies at Western Oregon University in Monmouth. And I'm here in Monmouth today, and I want to acknowledge that I'm on the ancestral homelands of the Kalapuyan peoples. I am so grateful to be a part of this wonderful event today, and I want to thank Sarah and Desiree and also everyone else who's participating. We have a brief 5 minutes for both Jan and for me, and I want to give a shout out to Jan and leave most of the time for her. But I want to just acquaint you with the Oregon Women's History Consortium's work, and particularly to have us think about how this group, which was started to commemorate the ballot measure that was successful in Oregon in 1912, removing the words white and male from voting requirements. And then also 2020, the commemoration of the 100th anniversary of placing votes for women protections in the federal Constitution with the 19th Amendment. From the beginning, we wanted this to be a complicated project where we complicated this narrative because we believe that history is a project for social justice. So we wanted to talk not just about voting and citizenship, but about those who did not have access, and we wanted to expand the story. So very briefly, for our online presence and exhibit work, many of the students at Western Oregon University engaged in interviews and broadened the lens of our work to say, for example, what were women in Oregon doing in 1920 so that we could broaden the lens. Students wanted to connect with the present and with diverse women leaders in the present. So we have interviews. A number of people were kind enough to grant interviews with us, including Natalia, Jan, and also Eliza is here. And also Representative Teresa Alonso Leon speaking about current issues of political engagement. We also wanted very much to find out what records could tell us about diverse women in Oregon in 1920. And so students did background research and also researched the 1920 census to find Oregon women in the 1920 census who were born in Mexico, and created pages that help us to see the kinds of questions that the census takers asked, and some of the information that we received. We found women who were traqueras, women who were religious sisters, women who were workers in other areas. So we hoped that this might be an opportunity to think about commemoration, but widening the lens of statewide commemorations to include more voices. And I'm going to turn the time now over to my colleague and dear friend, Jan Dilge.
Thanks, Kim. Thank you for holding this wonderful gathering. I'm learning so much and I'm honored to be part of it. I'm Jan Dilge. I was one of the founders of the Oregon Women's History Consortium. And I wanted to talk about, in addition to the work that we did around the state for the 2020 Suffrage Centennial, we engaged with one national project that really turned out to be wonderful benefits for us in Oregon, as well as giving Oregon history a larger national profile. And that was collaborating with the National Votes for Women Trail. And you see the URL and the landing page here. And this is a project of an online map designating women's suffrage sites across the nation. And this was a part of all 50 states and US territories participated to some extent in this project. And OWHC was kind of the liaison between that project and Oregon's suffrage history. And one of the reasons we were interested in engaging with this project is they shared our core values and principles about telling a complicated suffrage history story that was ethnically and racially and demographically diverse. And if you would do the next slide, Kim. And so OWHC was involved in populating suffrage sites in Oregon. And I know some of them are faint, but there really are sites all across the state because suffrage history was statewide history in Oregon. And so OWHC really served as a clearinghouse of information. And by participating in this project, it offered us a whole new avenue of working with partners, finding new partners and organizations and individuals across the state who either wanted to nominate
suffrage site and we helped provide that information. Or as the project and the year went on, some people started coming to us saying, I know someone in this area or an event, but I don't know how to get it on the map. And so we would help facilitate that in both directions. And so if you would do the next slide, Kim. You know, this is, it's not just dots on a map. We have 55 sites that we designated in Oregon, but if you hover over one of those rings on the map, information will come up about the person or the event, the time period they were working in. You know, our sites really document women's suffrage history from 1870s through 1920. And this is a dynamic project and an ongoing project. So we can continue to add sites. We've just really started to delve into some of that documentation that Kim's students did of Mexican women in Oregon, hoping to expand what we know about Latinx involvement in suffrage history in Oregon. So after I'm done speaking, I'll type in contact info and website info into the chat. And if you know anybody in your area, we'd love to add a site to this map or many sites to this map. So thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was really insightful and wonderful work that you're both doing. So now we have a second presentation for this segment on statewide models for heritage work. So now I would like to invite Emily West Hartlode from Oregon Folklife Network.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'm also going to share my screen and introduce the Oregon Folklife Network through a slideshow. I assume you all are seeing this?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So so my name is Emily West Hartlode, and I'm a folklorist at the Oregon Folklife Network, which is the state's designated folk and traditional arts program. Many of you may refer to folklife as intangible cultural heritage, ICH. But what that means for Oregon is that we are the state's, the Oregon Arts Commission partners with us as a statewide folk arts programming that serves underrepresented arts like Native American basket weaving, Andean charango making, Mexican folklorico dance. We receive funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. And by the way, the folk arts discipline at the National Endowment for the Arts is a fairly underutilized source. So I want you all to think about that as a real category for some of your projects, and I'm happy to help connect you with them. They are a major funder for us. At any rate, they help us to serve you by documenting, supporting, and celebrating Oregon's diverse cultural traditions. So we're a proud program of the Museum of Natural and Cultural History at the University of Oregon, though prior to 2010, Oregon's Folklife program enjoyed a decade of administration within the Oregon Historical Society, as Eliza Canty Jones mentioned earlier today. So thanks to Eliza and to Carrie Timchak for continuing to support this program. So for the last 10 years, we've really focused on 4 core programs: a survey of Oregon to meet traditional artists in the communities where they live and work, an online roster where one can find and hire a cultural artist for public programs, Culture Fest, which brings funds to cultural nonprofits around the state to utilize the roster, and the Traditional Arts Apprenticeship Program, which is a cornerstone of many folklife programs around the nation. Once a year, OFN awards an average of 5 master apprenticeship teams between $3,000 and $4,000 to spend about 6 or 9 months in intensive one-on-one lessons to help sustain and preserve cultural practices. Master and apprentice must be from the same cultural community and apply as a team to teach and learn an art form that is traditional to their shared culture. As you can see here, some master artists go on to earn other state and national awards. In addition to celebrating these master artists in Salem for formal award ceremonies like those in the last slide, we have also brought artists together for peer mentorship and professional development, all the while gaining valuable feedback from community leaders that we use to guide our programming priorities. An important way that we learn about culture keepers throughout the state is through our annual survey, where we send folklorists to a region of Oregon to meet and interview culture keepers. We have surveyed all of Eastern Oregon, Portland Metro, Willamette Valley, and the North Coast, and we're currently completing a survey of the Southern Coast. Next year, our 8th and final year will be spent in Southern Oregon, and then we'll take a couple of years off to promote our findings before starting all over again. We interview people engaged in occupational, ethnic, regional, and religious arts. So it's not enough to simply be a logger or a fisher person in the same way that it's not enough to simply be Chilean or Muslim, but you must express your culture through some form of art, food, ritual, performance, or other practice recognized by your community. And I'm sure you all know someone like this, and I'm always eager to learn about these folks in your communities. So hopefully this will be a chance for us to connect. Of the 25 to 50 culture keepers we meet in each region, most of them are added to our roster. And those numbers like 25 to 50 is during a particular annual survey, which is really just a few weeks that we spend in a particular region. So we add these artists to our roster, which is an online searchable database where presenters like libraries, schools, museums, festivals, and others can find and hire these traditional artists. From our landing page, visitors can enter an artist's name, county, heritage, or other keyword to find the Oregon culture keepers who match the search. And then all the artists who kind of fit those search criteria are pulled up with a profile and a brief description. Oops. That's my timer to tell me that I'm almost out of time here. So just a couple more slides. Selecting an artist will bring up a full page of contact information, social media links, work samples, and a biography that's rich with contextual information that helps educators, that helps to educate presenters about the artists and understand why their cultural tradition is important. And these profiles are approved by the artists so that presenters can trust that when they write a press release or a performance introduction, that they're representing the artist accurately and respectfully. So as I mentioned, the survey is not the only way that we get to know about artists. Your recommendations or people can self-nominate to our roster through a page on our website, which I'll share in just a moment. So lastly, Culture Fest is a program where when we meet cultural organizations through the survey, we can invite them to partner and receive funds to hire a cultural artist or a few cultural artists from our roster in order to infuse them into their newer existing programs. And so partners also, they get funding to help hire an artist. They also get access to a toolkit with press releases, stage diagrams, artist tech sheets, those kinds of templates that help their programs to succeed. So just lastly, I wanted to share with you our website that if you're interested in our programming, I invite you to go explore, and I'll just copy and paste that into the chat in just a moment. I quickly wanted to mention that we also have a new program. We're partnering with the Pomeroy Foundation, who is bringing bronze historical markers to Oregon sites, not just historical sites, but also legends and lores. So if you want to learn more about if there's a place in your community that has a story attached to it that you think is of cultural relevance, I'd be happy to connect you with them as well. So thanks for your time.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters for that quick lightning round of presentations. We are actually running, we're almost at 11 and we have until 11:30 today. So we want to give the rest of the time basically to you all for discussion. So we have a second breakout session and we'll come back about 11:15 to discuss as a group. So hang tight, it'll take a few minutes, but here are your questions and we'll put them in the chat, and you can also use the same note-taking document from the first chat and we'll put that in the chat too. All right, we'll let people have a moment to come back into the big room. Okay. So we hope that that you all had a great, fruitful conversation. Now we have just a few minutes, about 5-10 minutes before we wrap up to hear back. Would anyone like to share what was discussed in your groups? You can just use the hand feature, or if you want to just unmute yourself, feel free to jump in. What did you all think? Is there a need for more centralized coordination around preserving Oregon's Latinx heritage?
I'll jump in and say that our group was very excited about that idea, and also wanted to mention some of the challenges of people's time, to ensure that it's somewhat easy to get involved and stay involved, to ensure that community voices are heard and it's not just a panel of professionals, but some conversation about that it could be, this is a good starting place, and keeping the ball rolling could just be a matter of having an administrative person that does the doodle poll, gets everyone together, sets the meeting, takes the notes, and just makes sure that a convening continues to happen on a regular basis. And then that group can kind of problem solve, can self-organize and decide where to go from there.
These are all really great ideas. What about other groups?
This is Kim, and I had the pleasure of note-taking. We had a really great discussion in our group. And just a few things, the emphasis on respectful networking and making sure that we have conversations about connecting with and building relationships with organizations that are already in existence in the Latinx community, really recognizing intangible resources and really redefining what historic resources are, and really a strong sense among members here of the importance of connecting locally. Really great to have national information, but also a lot of power expressed. People felt it was very powerful to see what's happening locally and to build with that. Also seeing that this is a history that really needs to be shared with Latinx youth and communities, and making sure that as we try to share, that we think of innovative ways of doing that. We talked about, for example, story sharing, perhaps building from small things like Facebook groups or other smaller groups that could then keep in touch with one another. And I think that's kind of a summary of what we had. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Anyone else like to share?
I can say a little bit about the ideas that our group discussed, which are really, really wide-ranging and exciting to think about how the power of this kind of work is seated, and what are the ways to seat that power in youth and in local communities was one of the ideas that was discussed a lot. And so one person thought about a role for the Oregon Heritage Commission may be to replicate the model of the mentor corps, or the mentor project, right? And so are there hubs around the state where there are resources and supplies that youth and community members use to document their own histories and tell their stories in ways that they control? We also talked about the need for regular gathering like this of people who are interested in this. And one person mentioned the desire to see at the next gathering like this, Adelante Mujeres and Centro Cultural and other youth organizations as well that are already, in the community, doing the social justice work, doing the activism work, and what are the stories they want to tell. And I think everyone just sort of said, well, how do we just replicate the amazing work of the Latino Roots Project all over the state and just do more and more of that, because it's just so powerful. So those are some of the ideas. And I'll just say there's also concern about both potential for top-down organizing to maintain a narrative but that's sort of the insidiousness of the pioneer narrative in Oregon keeps coming in. These ideas of encounters, these ideas of coming to the place is not always the kind of narrative that communities really want to be telling, or that's not always, it's a narrative that continues to center whiteness, right, in ways that are not helpful. And so how to avoid doing that, and then also how to ensure, again, as Latino Roots has done, that the stories of the many, many diverse populations of peoples who have been coming here since the late 20th century in particular are centered in ways that help us move beyond putting the bracero history always at the forefront of this. So that's wide ranging, but it was a great conversation.
That sounds like a really great conversation, really good ideas. Thank you.
This is Stacy with the Capitol, and Sarah had reached out and just asked that I share something that I shared in our breakout, that we do have the Oregon Commission on Hispanic Affairs in our state. I am actually going to post a link in the chat. On that page that I just sent the link to, you can see who the commissioners are and when their next meeting is. And you have the ability to have public comment on the things that they're discussing or bring up something new for them to start discussing. And they then decide whether things need to be policy at the state level, and then can start working on language to bring that forward to the legislation or the legislature, and see if they can create a bill, of course, that becomes a statute and could even trigger funding for that idea. So I would recommend that you become aware of who the commissioners are, and there might be a commissioner that you even know of that you've worked with in something that you've done in the past, and you could start a conversation just with an individual, and they should have their email listed for you to do that.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else before we kind of wrap up that would like to share? Anyone from my group? Or other groups if you haven't presented? No? Okay. My group did talk about the importance of partnerships with, existing Latino based organizations, as well as, the Oregon Heritage Commission, but also Travel Oregon and some of these other institutional partners. They have resources. Travel Oregon in particular, has resources that they put towards tourism of natural resources. And so, maybe shifting some resources towards cultural sites. So partnerships, and also the topic of sustainability, it can be difficult to create something from scratch or something new. So kind of looking at ways of in which like communication is already happening, organizing is already happening, and maybe something as simple as just starting, there was interest in a follow-up event, but also just keeping in touch with each other and continuing to learn about what's already happening. So if no one else wants to share, if we're wrapped up with that, I would like to turn it over to Curry to provide some closing thoughts, and then Sarah and I will do the same.
Hey everybody, thank you again for that good work. I am super excited to see the results of the note taking. Some things popped up for me, like there are a few structural things that we do, some more people that could be included. Like I heard that Latinos in Heritage Conservation will, comment on National Register nominations. So noted as an interested party at this point. So there's some like basic things that came up. It was nice to talk to people. It was really good to see the interest. I knew about the programs being presented today, but seeing the depth of it gave me more information. I did not realize Latino Roots had the exhibit component, which can be funded by museums by 2 of our grant programs. So if you want to get those and put them in your spot, let me know, and I have money for that. Also, we have scholarships. So if you want to attend the conference that we heard about, that is an option too. So we provide scholarships. So I just want to share that we are here. Oregon Heritage is here to support this effort. What we will do is put together a survey, which is an evaluation survey, but it's also going to combine some of the things gleaned from the conversations today and ask where you want to be incorporated in knowing about those things or participating in those things, so we can kind of help move some next steps forward. And definitely thinking about how to, from our statewide level, continue to engage with regional organizations that work with Latino communities to make them aware of our resources and the value of this. So I learned a ton. It was a really great conversation. I'm so grateful to Desiree and Sarah for helping us through this, and I look forward to continue to working with them through this and in the future.
Thank you all. I'll go ahead and close this out. And thank you all for sharing your perspectives, your thoughts with us, your notes. And I must say that today was quite inspirational for me. It was really nice to hear all of the activity that's taking place in Oregon. And I think all of what we're doing is very much so connected and very much so under the same umbrella. So thank you all for the hard work that you are doing. And we welcome you to stay in touch with us. We would love for you to subscribe to La Herencia. You can subscribe to our newsletter by linking up through our website. You can follow us and like us on social media. And you could also scope out our website at latinoheritage.us. So thank you all so much. Also, forthcoming will be further news about Congreso 2022, which will take place in the spring, again in Denver. Another convening for us to bring like-minded professionals in this field and also community members to further our work and bring more attention to it. And again, convene under the same umbrella. So thank you all. There will be some sponsorship opportunities and scholarship opportunities for Congreso. So again, all of that is forthcoming. And thanks again for joining us this morning.
Thank you, everyone. Keep in touch. Have a great lunch. And enjoy the rest of the conference if you're attending.